right. Is my screen showing correctly? No?
Yep.
All right. I think we will get started. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lorelei Diveter with the IPM Institute's Pest Defense for Healthy Schools. Welcome to the November call for the North Central School IPM Working Group. On today's call, we'll hear from 4 IPM professionals: Janet Hurley, Leah McSherry, Lynn Rose, and Tim Stock. A little bit more about today's webinar. We're having a panel discussion moderated by the IPM Institute's Ryan Anderson. These panelists were chosen because of their recent paper on improving environmental health in schools. We are lucky enough to gather a few of the authors to participate in this discussion. So Ryan Anderson, who is our moderator, has extensive experience advancing science-based solutions in urban and residential communities. This is highlighted by his management of the Sustainable Communities Group. At the IPM Institute, Ryan devotes most of his time to Midwest Grows Green, a project that identifies, teaches, and implements sustainable landscaping. And next up, we have Janet Hurley. She is an extension program specialist at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And there she coordinates school IPM coordinator trainings for Texas Public Schools. She also serves as a longstanding committee member and is the current co-chair for the International IPM Symposium. Next up, we have Leah McSherry. She has been with the IPM Institute for 3 years, where she leads the TIC IPM working group, Green Shield certified for pest management providers, and assists with the planning of the 11th International IPM Symposium. She previously led the school IPM initiatives by coordinating the in-person trainings, hosting webinars, as well as writing and distributing the Pest Defense newsletter. Next up, we have Lynn Rose. She is an environmental health and safety consultant from Massachusetts and provides environmental health and safety technical services to school districts, municipalities, state agencies, and small businesses. Then lastly, we have Tim Stock, and he is the school IPM program director at Oregon State University. There, he leads the school IPM trainings and works with schools throughout the state to improve pest management while reducing costs, workload, and the associated risk with pests and pesticides. And I want to thank all the registrants who were able to respond to our survey. We found 3 standout topics to focus on for our webinar today. Those are measuring effectiveness of an IPM plan and services, methods to improve environmental health or IPM programs through training and resources, and engaging decision makers in IPM or environmental health. And then I want to acknowledge our funders. Funding for this working group is provided by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Crop Protection and Pest Management Program through the North Central IPM Center. And then another one is the National Education Association, which is the nation's largest professional employee organization, representing 3 million elementary and secondary teachers, higher education faculty, education support professionals, school administrators, retired educators, and schools and students preparing to become teachers. Then we have a sponsorship from Pest Boss, a software company that empowers facility managers with the tools to conduct and oversee facility pest management inspections, abatement activities, and monitoring reporting. And our final sponsor is Excluder, the global leader in rodent and pest exclusion products. Excluder offers a wide range of products for both commercial and residential applications. Their line of patented rodent-proof products include fill fabric for gaps and cracks, entry door sweeps, and vertical seals. And then I have a few pest defense updates for everyone. So please remember that our online training modules are free and open access through our website, thepestdefenseforhealthyschools.org. And if you're not subscribed to our newsletter or would like to join our working group to get updates for webinars and these types of events, please feel free to send me an email at ldiveter@ipminstitute.org. And I want to thank everyone who was able to send us a letter of support for the North Central IPM proposal, which is due tomorrow. We plan to apply for renewed funding and work with students to teach them about indoor and outdoor IPM. And with that, I will pass it on to Ryan and start our poll just to get a little more information from everyone.
And while that poll is going up, as Lorelai said, my name is Ryan Anderson. I'm the Sustainable Communities Manager for the IPM Institute of North America. So I oversee a lot of our programs that work with park districts, school districts, and municipalities to reduce or even eliminate their synthetic pesticide use. So I've worked with a lot of schools, didn't contribute to this paper, but I know each of these panelists, and I'm very happy that they decided to join us today for this panel, for this important discussion. So Lorelai mentioned that there was a report or article that these panelists contributed to. And I just want to give a little bit of oversight into that report and what I got out of it. If you didn't have the opportunity to see that full report or review it. And the main thing that we talked about with the panelists is we really want to stress the importance of improving environmental health in schools and how IPM can be a contributor or even a leader in improvement of environmental health. And so how we want to start it off with is just the issues, the environmental health issues that are occurring in our schools, and just the brevity of school infrastructure. I thought this was very interesting that I didn't from the article, is that public schools are our nation's largest public building sector. And it covers more square footage minus our highway system that is in minus our highway system across the US. So if you are a building manager, you are managing a large infrastructure across our United States. And of course, the main problem with public schools is that 53% of our districts report the need to update or replace building systems. A lot of our public schools are aging, and that's causing pest problems, but also sanitation issues. And so the common issues that we're seeing is overcrowded buildings with substandard ventilation, poor sanitation, unacceptable indoor air conditions, and of course, our main focus as IPM practitioners, chronic pest problems within these schools. And these issues really came out during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw schools that were recommended to close and do virtual learning. And the CDC guidelines to return back to school said, you have to be able to be socially distanced. You need to do sanitation practices. And we found a lot of our schools had trouble adhering to those restrictions to return back to school. And while some people might say it was a huge success for some of these school districts, showing that we can do virtual training, that is not an option for the majority of our populations, specifically our underserved populations. So the article goes through a Navajo Nation school district in Arizona, where only 30% of the families have access to broadband internet. So with that data, their access to learning obviously decreases. And so we still believe that the best environment for learning is the actual physical school building. And so that's what we're really trying to promote here, is how can we reduce school absentee rates and improve indoor environmental health. And I guess, Lorelai, if you could go to the next slide. This is a quote from at the end of the article that really resonated with me, kind of encapsulated everything that I just talked about the importance of schools and the importance of improving environmental health. And that's, today we are issuing a national call to action, because quite simply, the state of our schools is a national emergency, or is in a national emergency. So with all that information about the environmental health issues and the article, I want to pose this question now to our panelists. Are we as IPM practitioners or just as the IPM sector, are we prepared to lead this national call to action? And if not, what do we need to do in terms of our messaging or in terms of our engagement of schools to become leaders in this national call to action? So I guess who from our panelists would like to start off with that big question that I have?
I could go.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Sure. I actually wrote out my answer, and this will hopefully be the only time that I'm actually reading something. And the rest I'll just, talk as it comes to my head. But my answer is actually it's a yes and a no. My yes is because we have the collaborative expertise in pest prevention and pest control in general, and for specific species of pests. And we conduct outreach, education, training. We produce supportive educational fact sheets and publications, and we learn from and with each other. Now, when I say we, I mean people like the four of us panelists, but also a growing number of IPM experts at schools, like facilities managers, custodial staff, custodial supervisor, risk management specialists, school grounds leads. But they can also include pest management professionals from pest control companies that understand, love doing IPM. And then the no part of it, the no answer, is it's because we're lacking the level of local, state, and federal support needed to make it happen. And that includes support from school boards, superintendents, and this is sort of a broad brush. It's not like, I'm sure I know there are some superintendents, especially here in Oregon, that are very supportive, and school boards as well. But anyway, so school boards, superintendents, associations of those individuals, and also associations of school boards and superintendents, state elected officials, and then federal agencies responsible for health and safety of children, that kind of thing. The reasons for the lack of support are complex. I think the lack of awareness and understanding of the seriousness and risks to our children are a big part of it. And then the bigger picture includes what Ryan mentioned earlier, is that it's just insufficient funding for maintenance and operation of school buildings. And I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Tim. I'll go with the next panelist. Janet, can you?
Well, to reiterate what Tim said, yes, it's as change agent leaders, I'll speak for myself in Texas. Am I equipped to help? Yes. Do we have the funds and the momentum? Yeah. Because again, it's competing. There's so much competing now with schools. When school IPM was first brought up as a call to action, or indoor air quality, or any of that, the country was a lot different before 2001. Then you fast forward to 2023, and districts are now facing additional issues with their buildings, and not just thinking about building infrastructure. But what we're not realizing is, what does it really take to make sure that our school buildings are healthy? And what I've always trained, and I know that there's several people on this webinar that have heard me in person, but it is the belief of a parent, grandparent, custodian of a child, that I send that small little wee human to this institution, and they're going to be safe and secure for that 8 to 9 hours a day. And that means that the indoor air quality is great, that nobody can get in, that, we have all these preconceived conceptions. And while they're there, what we don't have is the financial support to ensure that those preconceived conceptions are being fulfilled And that has to do a lot with silos. And again, people just particularly not asking for help. Once upon a time, the PTA helped the school building make sure it was maintained. Now that's not something that we ask because of security reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Lynn has got way more experience in her state.
That's a great transition too, Lynn.
So, I mean, in terms of the IPM sector ready to lead, I think I kind of want to look at it from the other side. I think what my experience is, I work extensively for the last 20 years with facility administrators, and I work really closely with the Association of Facility Administrators. And what I find is that they don't understand necessarily the connection between the buildings and IPM. And they also, it's the kind of thing, there's so many things that they're responsible for. They can hire a pest control operator to do IPM. And although they may not be doing it well, and not like real IPM, they might be bait junkies. What I find is if they can contract something out, they will. So it's really, I think in terms of IPM being folks being leaders, it's really about educating people for that connection, to understand that connection, and that you just can't rely on vendors. And it's not just something you can use bait for, right? It's water infiltration. It's the things that Janet talks about all the time, right? It's the condition of the building and the penetrations and the maintenance. So I just looking at it from the other side, I would say that it's not that we might not want to lead and have a lot of information. It's really understanding those silos that are referred to, is that people do not see the connection.
Thank you. And then finally, our final panelist, Leah.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks everyone. First, I just wanna say that out of the panelists we have here today, I am the most new to the school IPM environment, but from my limited experience in the field, I have also seen a lot of the issues that you guys have brought up, especially the funding piece and the ability for schools to implement IPM suggestions. Like, for example, when I shadowed Tom Green, our president and founder here at the IPM Institute, on a school IPM walkthrough, he was able to pinpoint a lot of pest-conducive conditions that needed to be mitigated to reduce pest entry into the school, especially mice. And as we were pointing these things out, such as damaged door sweeps or screens that need to be fixed, a lot of the school staff that we were expressing these fixes to were aware of them and realized that they did need to be fixed, but they simply weren't receiving. They either don't have enough staff to implement those changes, or they don't have the funds to make those fixes. So we had the funds to do those walkthroughs and do that education, but we needed additional funds to make those fixes for the school and support them in that way, because oftentimes the schools themselves don't have the capability to make the necessary changes to ensure that there are reduced opportunities for pests to enter the schools. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
So to interject on Leah, and this does have to do with that education part. So many school districts that I have worked with and such don't realize that some of your local big box stores, especially if they do home repair stuff, or if they sell a lot of stuff and it's a mixed bag of nuts. And the reason I bring up the big ones without naming names, but every last one of them generally has some type of local scholarship for the PTA or for a school. And I've told everybody, even if it's $500 worth of door sweeps, it's $500 worth of door sweeps. It's $500 worth of Rubbermaid containers. But if you could get that and then get the local buy-in from said Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Tractor Supply, pick your poison, any of those. But again, this is where maybe the PTA or you have a local community, then they're trying to do a volunteer thing, because we get that every now and then at our agency. Hey, this local group wants to do something. Do you guys got anything that they can do? And they want to do physical feel touch things. And I'm like, well, let them fix the door sweeps and the lights and the stuff, because you're short staffed, but you might get 5 engineers that get out on your school building and they can fix a lot of things. But we have neglected to figure out how to do that. And I'm hoping from just this wee bitty little webinar, it helps others understand there is more ways to do things.
Thank you, Janet. And, I'm now moving on to the next section of measuring effectiveness of IPM programs. I think from a lot of what each person said, we know as IPM, one of our main monitoring, of course, is the pests that get into our building and how can we exclude them? How can we eliminate them? But I'm a little bit interested in, yeah, we can measure that, but can we actually also do some other environmental health measurements within that, not just the pests? How can we apply our work to these other environmental health metrics that are mentioned in the article? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that question first, and what would be, to go on that, what would be the data points or the metrics that you would emphasize past just the pest presence in our schools?
The biggest one?
Mm-hmm.
Biggest one is student absentee rates. Second biggest one is, it depends on how, if you really want to look at your IPM program and know if you're doing right or wrong, you go through IPM STAR. And I am such a firm believer of this, and it has to do with the difference of, and I'm going to speak from the Texas perspective, and the folks that are from Texas will probably agree. In Texas, our state regulatory agency comes in, but we look at just what the rules say. Do you do this? Yes, no. Do you have this? Yes or no. But is as a way to actually look at, are you doing IPM? How are you actually doing your chemical applications? Are you doing your monitoring? How do you do education? Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to go through. I can pick on one person who's actually online right now, but that school district and many others that I've worked with, it really helps. But it's once you get it, and then you pair that with EPA's tools for schools stuff, and then you start looking at all the other things, and this is where it gets quirky, because you've got your indoor air quality. That's probably one department in Department of Health Services. You have the sanitarians, they do one other thing. You have pest management, that's a different department. You do asthma, that's a different department. So, this is where, yeah, can you measure it? It's just not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Go, Lynn.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I just want to build on that. So what we did was we built in the IPM inspections into our Tools for Schools teams, our indoor air quality teams, so that we looked at the asthma issues. We looked at, because you're right, there's all those silos, and you can't have a team for this and a team for that. And that's where the Tools for Schools model was really helpful. And so we built in the IPM, at least from the staff and administrative level, looking at conditions in the building. So at least on an annual basis, and then you had people meeting. It just tends to be, for the Tools for Schools, is once the big issues go away, the team kind of goes away, and that's a whole other issue. But so sustaining that kind of integrated approach would be great. I wanna just do a real brief say that one of the issues that I see in terms of measuring the IPM success in a building is I had to work really hard with vendors. I write bid specs and I oversee vendors. And what we were not getting information in our service reports, like, oh yeah, I put out a trap or I did this. There was no like, is it seasonal? Is it the population's increasing, decreasing? Were things fixed that you recommended? So in terms of measuring success, we had to collect the data about what was going on in the building, and the people that were most in touch with that were the vendors. And in order for us to collect information, I had to create I had to create a form that they had to fill out so that at the end of the year we could look at what was going on. Were things being done that were recommended? Were they actually monitoring the populations? Or, was it the bait junkie type of thing? And so in terms of the success of a program, if you can't collect data about what's going on, you could say at the end of the year, well, we still have a rodent infestation that tells you something. I think, Janet, it's much harder to attach that these asthma rates are due to the rodents in the building or the cockroaches, right? It's much harder. So it's more like, what's going on in the program, and are we seeing a decline? What's going on? So I just found that in order to have an annual report and to do an evaluation and to decide for the upcoming year, because you can have the checklist. I mean, I'm not familiar with IPM Star, which I feel like I should be now. It's just, but we have these plans in Massachusetts. We are a regulated state. We do have an IPM law. And on paper, it looks fine. We have all these things, but in reality, people are not doing those things. So it's really sitting down on it. Well, it's like collecting the information and then revisiting it, doing that initial assessment, monitoring through the year about what's going on, and then at the end of the year, doing another evaluation.
Yeah. That's a great way, because IPM Star has been mentioned a couple times, and that's a program that has been managed by the IPM Institute. It's now Green Shield certified for facilities. Let Leah add a little bit insight on for people who are unfamiliar with IPM Star and Green Shield certified.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I did put in the chat just to share what Ryan had just mentioned, that IPM Star is now Green Shield certified for facilities, which I put a link to in the chat to our website for a little bit more information about that. And just to add to what Lynn said, like with the work that we did with some schools here in Wisconsin, we were hoping to measure pest pressure and pesticide use before and after. We educated the school staff about how to implement IPM within their schools. It was a challenge to receive that data from the schools. It took quite a bit of following up with the facility managers, and we were able to finally physically go to the school ourselves and get some data. But it was a challenge for sure. And let's see. And then also we were hoping to use data from the Wisconsin Asthma Coalition to look at asthma rates to see if there was any type of correlation there, but they also had some limitations in their data gathering. And it also was a challenge when we were trying to implement these IPM changes to the schools, especially since it was taking place in 2020, and a lot of the students weren't in the schools. So the data that we would have gathered wouldn't necessarily be accurate, because there was probably a lot less pest conducive conditions, since there weren't people in the buildings to produce food and water and everything else pests need to thrive. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Could I add just one thing, and that's that the other evaluation has to be the staff meeting, like to sit down with the custodial staff and the food service and facilities and talk about, like, were things communicated? Are people using the pest sighting guide? Do people feel like, are work orders being put in? So like, look there, I was talking about the vendor side, but there's also looking at the school side, and you're saying that information's hard to get. And that's really about sitting the departments down in a building and also at the district level.
Yeah.
Oh, can I?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was just saying, when Leah was talking, I was thinking that's kind of how things were when I got started here in Oregon, and it was really challenging. We got grants to do pilot projects and everything. So ideally, it would be useful to have pesticide application records, pesticide complaints, those kinds of things, but that doesn't always happen. And also ground truthing sort of thing. You do those things, but then you're able to sort of maybe not a full-blown inspection where you're inspecting a lot of things, but just a key number of things that you're able to go and just sort of randomly go to different schools and different districts and look at things. One of the things that I've done with the training, and then sometimes external to the training that we do training. Boy, beautiful cat there, Ryan. Sorry, I get distracted by cats easily. Is we do post training questionnaire. How are you? What are you going to? What did you learn today that you're going to implement? That kind of thing. And then we've done other surveys where you actually have specific questions and these are like every 3-4 years. So it's, we're just doing the best we can with what we've got.
Thanks, Tim. And now I want to move on to the next topic, but it also pertains, I think, a lot to what Lynn said with developing these teams, like these IPM teams or even like green teams. I'm curious if we can go a little bit more into that strategy of having teams with different staffing groups or even students across the school district. And if the panelists can elaborate on some of the best strategies to first develop that team to motivate people to become a part of a team focused on pest management or environmental health, and then after creating that team, what are some of the best strategies to keep them engaged and making sure that the goals that we set out for this team are actually being implemented at the IPM scale or overall environmental health?
I could talk, but I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking. Does anybody else want to go first? Because I've done a lot of that. But
Go for it, Lynn.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, I did, for one of my districts, over 50 buildings and some other districts. But what really has to happen is the education. Like, we would form a team. We would some people would be appointed. You clearly need to have custodial represented. You need to have, at least at the school building level. What I found the most successful is to have a district level team. And then that ensures that, so facilities is going to allow their custodian, their senior, to attend meetings, the food service. I think you run into issues where when you have contracted people, you have like, when are you going to have these meetings? And it can't be a one issue committee or team. And what we did was we would train people. We wouldn't get a lot of time. We would do walkthroughs. We'd come back together and like I think Tim was saying, ground truth that information and figure out what needed to happen. And so we would break it down as like, what is policy type of thing? What are work practices? What are operations? What's maintenance? And so having recommendations and having the principal support that. And so I think, and, we would do, in addition to walkthroughs, we did surveys on SurveyMonkey, using the Tools for Schools format. And when you were getting information from the ground up, it was really helpful because I'm not there first thing in the morning when you walk in and there's, rodent poop on the floor, or your stuff's chewed through. So we don't always see that. So it was helpful to combine the surveys once a year with the walkthroughs and the other information. But it's really hard to sustain those teams. So we found that it can't be just indoor air quality or just IPM, but an environmental team, like I think Janet was saying, so you take that Tools for Schools does have that umbrella, and you can add into it whatever you need to in terms of what you're monitoring. But we found it really made a huge difference to have the district level team where the departments met, and then the school building team. I actually have a schematic of that when I meet with schools to talk about how that should work.
Anyone else want to add insight to that?
I just had a question for Lynn. So when you're talking about the team, you're talking about not just IPM, but environmental health team. So you're looking at indoor air quality and that kind of thing as well, right? Or
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if there's other issues, like some people might be issues, we've got water infiltration, we got mold, we've got, there's high asthma rate. So what helps sustain a team? If it's just indoor air quality, like the big problem goes away, it's with so much going on in the schools, it's really hard to get the commitment to maintain the team. So if there's an umbrella where any of the issues can be addressed, and so when we do the walkthrough, we do inside and we look at pest stuff, and we do the outside, we're also looking, pest infiltration, penetrations. We build that right into the annual inspection or walkthrough, and we take the data that we generate from the occupants and combine it with the walkthrough information, and it can, so this webinar is about how to improve environmental conditions and buildings, with IPM being one piece, and that is one strategy.
Thanks.
So there was also mentioned earlier on, I think it was from you, Lynn, but a lot of schools obviously work with vendors, either for pest control, but for other services like sanitation and everything like that. And, as we're talking about these teams and the difficulty of doing things like ground truthing and getting all the data for IPM programs and environmental programs, how can we, what are some best strategies to engage these vendors and to actually also, on top of that, to select the correct vendors that can support our environmental health or IPM programs at schools?
So I'm glad and I'll let people speak after this. I'm glad you reminded me, because I was talking before about this. So the problem, we ran into a huge problem when we had outsourced our custodian and we outsourced our food service, and the pest control operator would come in after hours. First of all, he did not have the authority to talk to any of those staff if they were there. And then the timing made it really hard. And so that would really need to be facilitated by the school district to bring those people together to have communication, or create some other way for the pest control operator to communicate, having a pest log from these different departments, or, one central log. But I also work in a school district where everything is in-house, and we were able to get people to meet with the pest control operator. So it really depends on the constellation of vendors that you have, but it's really up to the school district to create those avenues of communication. But they were huge barriers because of that. They were huge.
Thank you.
Yeah, it definitely does help to have the pest control staff be in-house. Like when you do outsource it, it does become more of a challenge because they're not as intimately aware of the pest pressures of the school, and if there is in-house facility management folks at the school, they're there when the students are there and are able to see where maybe the pest pressure is coming from. But if the school does work with an outside vendor for certain things, especially with pest control, a way to try to ensure that they're following IPM practices is if they were to go through the Green Shield certified for facilities program. Since we have the IPM Institute will send out IPM experts to evaluate some of the schools within the district, and also the pest control service to ensure that they are implementing IPM, and will offer suggestions on how they can improve it. And also will review the pesticide products being used to ensure none of the active ingredients have any known health effects, such as carcinogens, which of course is
the reality.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Okay, I'm going to give you guys the reality.
Oh, sure.
In Texas, close to 30 years with a law, with an appointed IPM coordinator who gets training. However, 1,026 school districts in Texas, that IPM coordinator can be anywhere from somebody who's grounds maintenance to a superintendent. The lower you are in the hierarchy of the school district, even though you're the coordinator, you're not believed. You are not believed, and then they have to fight. Silos is a governmental problem, because one of the things that if you're going to be successful, and I don't care what kind of institution you are or business, the more that you communicate, the more you educate, the more you work across boundaries, the better things are. The problem is with school districts, budget's tight, everybody holds on. The hardest part for a district IPM coordinator is to get the others to understand we are all working together. And this is the hardest part. I've watched it for 22 years. This is the hardest thing that I help my schools try to get over a hurdle, because it's not easy. And even when you got everybody working together, all it takes is one person to retire, and then it all goes sideways. And then you're back to square one, and you're like, okay, but why? But this is where we can help. I mean, here we are, we're all doom and gloom, but I want us to get back on the positive note of there are so many ways and so many more resources. When I started in 2001, what we had then compared to what we have now, and I'll be very honest with the audience watching, and what is going to come out in the next year or so because of some additional funding, we get it. But we also need your help. I mean, you know, it's great. We've got this IPM Institute who helps us with all our school IPM stuff. But again, we've got people who might not be giving us this, oh yeah, we could really use a really cool infographic on. Because what did we learn in COVID? It's all about the infographic and a QR code. Everything's a QR code, everybody, by the way.
I just had a few things to add. One of the questions was, you know, how do you choose a pest control company, a vendor? And there are a number of documents out there. I think I have one on my website, which I think I got from Janet or somewhere West Virginia, who got it from somebody, you know, and modifications and stuff. I think IPM Institute maybe have it. The National Pesticide Information Center has something. But one of the things, a few of the things that are in the most of the checklist is, do they tell you what, if they come and do an inspection or when they do their routes or whatever, do they tell you what the cause is? Are they diagnosticians, so to speak? Another thing about just monitoring effectiveness is keeping track of what knowing what they're actually doing, depending on the actual you know, situation in your district or your school, is knowing what they're doing, understanding the paperwork, what this means, that kind of thing. And then of course keeping track of, well, again, but it's a challenge, keeping track of the applications over time.
Thank you, Tim. All right. Oh, sorry.
One thing, sorry. So one of the things I did in terms of, I like all your ideas of like how to vet a vendor. I mean, we do that through bid specs, and we have our criteria. So I have criteria, you know, for approving a bid spec or a vendor on bid spec. But I work with our state purchasing agency because they have vendors for IPM on state contract. And so what we did is it was many years ago, I wrote a handbook. We co-wrote with the state agency that does the procurement about what schools needed to ask for from their vendors and what IPM was, and if you're going to hire a vendor. So we gave them the criteria, and then we actually surveyed the vendors, and then we gave them criteria, and then we were able to list our vendors, the vendors that really passed that criteria, because I didn't, you know, that's like 15 years ago. So we didn't have the systems that you're talking about. So that's what we were trying to do to try and support schools in selecting vendors that really understood IPM. So we worked both sides of it. We worked with our vendors and we worked with criteria. And not everybody uses state contract. They don't have to. But if they do, those vendors were vetted.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. I do want to give some time soon to the audience to give their questions if they have any for the panelists. But so I just want to do one final question, moving on to our third topic. I mean, one of the main things that we wanted to hammer home today was why this is so important to address environmental health in our schools. And so posing just a short response maybe for each, how do we make the case to the ultimate decision makers? Because the ultimate decision makers, the people on the school boards, or even if we go as far as state policy, because we've seen some successful state policies like in Texas, how do we make the case to them that we need to have some sort of environmental health policy, IPM policy, or program? What would your message be to those decision makers?
I think this goes to what Janet said, because if you don't have a policy, or if you don't have a policy in place, you lose your champion, you lose your program. And it's really about that admin level, but it has to be integrated if you don't educate people about why you need to have a policy. So that's a big piece of it.
It is. I mean, and it's not just that. I mean, even though I have a state where it's mandated, and I literally can go and look it up online for any district without even their knowledge.
Right.
The hardest part is making sure that, again, that changing leadership that is voted in understands. I mean, I say this often, but 3 of my largest school districts in the state, well, I'll go for 5. 5 of the largest school districts in the state, the IPM and the IPM coordinator and the superintendent are not even in the same realm.
Right.
And I mean, we're talking large districts. And it was interesting seeing a news report last night about this district putting money back into building integrities, because we've got people coming here and nobody wants to go to this large school district. Because again, the suburbs have put the money in to not only their campuses, but making sure they've got a good indoor air quality IPM, student career, it's got all the soups and the nuts. But it's getting harder when funds are being clipped. So how do you support them? This is the hardest thing. I just don't know, except for the fact that every grassroots group can have a voice and can have advocates. And there are people who can make few suggestions here and there, and you'd be surprised what you can do.
Thanks, Janet. I know we only have 1 minute before we want to go to questions, but I just wanted to quickly add from my past experience, almost a decade ago, which is crazy to admit, I worked for the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation and helped with teaching students about how to write political resolutions to help protect wildlife and their environments. And I think a similar approach could be taken to implement policy changes in states such as Wisconsin that don't currently have laws that have any restrictions on pesticide use. And I think if states that currently don't have any restrictions, such as Wisconsin, were encouraged to do so by change makers through presenting these political resolutions, I think we could see a lot more progress with enforcing IPM and getting support for it.
Thanks. And Tim, if you have anything to say, I want to let you your last word before Q&A.
I'm good. Thanks,
well, Well, it's just that those of you that don't know, I followed Janet's footsteps. We had a law passed about 10 years ago, and we have about 1,000 schools, but only 197 school districts. I was involved. I sort of somehow got involved with the legislation, the groups that were involved in creating the original legislation, and then 3 different sets of attempts to change the law after it had been passed. So I guess the only thing I could add or say would be that other than what haven't been said is that I noticed that people that are advocating for changes in laws are not thinking much at all about pests. They're thinking about reduction in pesticides. And I always try to go to pests first, as what came first, the pesticide or the pest. And that has been a challenge with the legislature, and then people are pushing for change at the legislative at that level. So that's about it for that I had to add. And I'll put a few links in the chat for like
Great. If you do have any questions, first we would prefer if you put in the chat for our panelists. We'll open it up, and we have one question right now from Mark Lesher. Whatever happened to make IPM in schools a national, mandatory, and enforceable law?
Oh, I've got this one. That one died on the vine, Mark. That died 2 presidents ago on the vine. Because remember, you've got to get that through Congress. Good luck with that.
Any other questions?
Wait a second. I'm going to back up since I don't see any questions popping up. Here is what, I mean, if you haven't been paying attention, while we're talking about school IPM and all, federally, EPA is now under new guidelines to really look at endangered species and pesticide re-registration and registration. Everything that I have seen so far is pointing to more use and more viability for IPM. And my running joke has been, we were country before country was cool. Well, we were IPM before IPM was cool. We're cool again. And would you like to join us on the International IPM Symposium?
Any other questions from the audience?
Thanks, Janet, for mentioning the IPM Symposium. I just put in the chat my email in case anyone's interested in getting involved with that. Our next event is going to be March 3rd through the 6th of 2025 in San Diego, California. Oh, Diane has his hand up. Go ahead, Diane. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
We can't hear you. There you go.
Sorry, it's not a question, but it is a comment. I've got a lot of experience working with this, particularly here in Philadelphia, where we have a very large school district. And without district buy-in, it's been impossible to move the agency. And yeah, retirements are hugely disruptive and sometimes destructive. Although on the other hand, sometimes they can move things along when somebody who's intractable, steps out of the picture. But we had one experience here where we actually got funding to bring Dr. Bobby Corrigan to talk specifically to the maintenance supervisors and overseers. It's another problem is that the district is so balkanized. There are so many administrative divisions and separate union rules around different things that it's just incredibly difficult to get any kind of agreement. And then without district support, it doesn't happen. So what I was starting to say is that we brought Dr. Corrigan in to do this training for the district. We had literally one person show up. And she brought one of her underlings the second day, because being there the first day, she realized how important and useful the training was. But the other 20 odd people that we had targeted didn't even bother to respond to the emails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We definitely see that challenge in our work every day. We do have a question sort of related to this topic and about any success stories for schools getting funds to support IPM. I want to do it from my perspective, and then I'll give it to the panelists. But what we've really found at the IPM Institute is there's a kind of a great trend going around for schools of, especially in the Midwest, of restoring their schoolyards from asphalt to green spaces. And that's a way we've had connections in Milwaukee for us to talk about IPM and the outdoor, and then we're hoping to connect that to the indoor as they they get all these investments for water infrastructure and things like that. So that's been a way for us to apply it and to kind of increase school IPM involvement. But I don't know if our panelists have something to say about that.
Tom had a question or a raised hand.
Yeah, or we can give it to Tom. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, this has been great. Really appreciate all the work that everybody's doing, and the participants for joining. One of the things that really helped attendance in our work with the National Education Association, we had that problem initially where we just could not get people to come, was that they made the training. They worked with the school district to make the training mandatory and to hold it during work hours, and people got paid for that. And it made a huge difference in attendance. And, people who came, give us, we continue to do these periodically, but they give us just great evaluations, and they really appreciate what they've learned. So I think that strategy of, doing it on paid time, and particularly, if you're looking at food service and custodial and maintenance workers, they just don't have opportunities for professional development time like this, and they enjoy getting the time off, learning stuff that they can use at home, and they get a certificate at the end that goes in their personnel file.
Thank you for that, Tom. And we've gotten more funding to do those trainings with NEA, so we're excited about that. We have a question, just I believe, about the national law that was proposed. If the wording for that national law is available anywhere. Janet, do you know if the wording?
I would have to go pawing through my hard drive. Okay. Since I know who asked that question, you can wait till I come visit your state.
Beyond Pesticides would have it, I'm sure, at their fingertips.
I would hope they would. I know it's somewhere on one of my hard drives.
Yeah, they put a lot of time and effort into that. No avail.
Mm-hmm. Then we had another question about, is there a written guideline for educating school staff about IPM and how they are involved in the process? And Janet shared Pest Defense for healthyschools.org. Thank you, Janet. That is our free online source. There's 9 different training modules within that website, as well as a module for the state of Illinois. And we're hoping to develop for specific states in the future too.
Well, and that is something with the funding that I've got coming. Texas has asked if we would do one, and I've already sidelined that and said, yes, we'll do it as soon as the funding drops.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also, oh, sorry, I just did not say, I also put in the chat a link from the Pest Defense Bradley School's website with more information about our in-person workshops if anyone was interested in that. But again, we'd have to receive funds to do that too, but in case we do.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions, but for everybody that's still on, we do have a post survey quiz. So Lorelai, could you share that? And if you do have any more questions too, please feel free while we're doing that post quiz for our participation.
Are you seeing it?
I'm not, but
It says I launched it, but it's
I
not
see
showing
it.
up for you. Oh, you do? Okay.
It looks like people are answering. Can you not see it, Lorelai?
I can see it, but I can't see that people are answering.
Okay.
So,
I can see people are answering on my end, so that's good.
good.
And then as people are answering that question, once again, we have Pest Defense is free to take. We also, if you enjoy sessions like this, Lorelai mentioned at the beginning that we are submitting for another North Central IPM proposal, and we would really appreciate as many letters of support that we can receive before the deadline due tomorrow. We're going to do these bi-monthly sessions again in our proposal. We're also, as I mentioned, we're trying to develop trainings through Pest Defense specific to states. That's another one of our objectives. And then our final objective is where we're working with K through 12 students to teach them IPM. So if we have more IPM curriculum, we think that these schools will increase their adoption of IPM because they'll place more emphasis on it. So that's our 3 goals and objectives for this upcoming year.
Thanks, Ryan. And then, yeah, if anyone's interested in supporting us, please reach out to Lorelai and provide your letter of support. We'd be happy to provide a draft letter if you guys don't have time to draft one in between now and tomorrow. If you can just add your company letterhead and signature, that'd be greatly appreciated. The more letters of support we have, the stronger our application is and more likely we'll receive renewed funding.
Looks like they
And
found.
then just wanted to let you know, Janet messaged me and said she had to hop off. And she just said hugs to everyone and to pass it on to everyone. So hugs from Janet. And then it looks like Joellen put in the chat the national law. Thanks, Joellen.
I think that's our cue for everybody. So thank you again for joining. I thought this session was great, and we don't have the next session planned in 2 months, but we will announce it once we do have it set. It'll be in January, will be our next session. So thank you all and have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.